I wanted to give you a brief sort of situational awareness of design, at least from my perspective. I have to thank the folks that came up with this title, The Archipelago of Design, that gave me license to use a metaphor of archipelagos. And I use this just ruthlessly. And I've got a huge, long narrative of which I will just get through a part of. So if in the end it sounds sort of unfinished, it is. There's a part two that comes to this. But for me, it was a great metaphor, a very powerful metaphor. So anyway, just to introduce myself a bit, I call myself an accidental vagrant. When you're out in the middle of the ocean, I was in the Navy years ago. When you're out in the middle of the ocean, you'll find land birds out there that don't belong. They shouldn't be out there. And it turns out that those land birds were blown off course, or they just chose to wander. And it's the accidental vagrants that fill niches or establish new ecosystems on new lands. So I think that was a good description, because I certainly got blown off course. I was a very happy architect. I became licensed in California. I knew what to do. I knew where my rewards were. I knew what the rules were. I knew how I had to dress. So I got into some deep projects, very complex design projects that just sort of overwhelmed me a bit. Went to Berkeley, because that's where you went when you had big questions, and I fell in with a bad crowd. There were people there who worked on systems and design and refused to fit into any category. And I thought I knew everything about design that I needed to know, and I found out I didn't. It was kind of humiliating. All these other people knew about design in ways that I never thought of. So as an architect, I had to give a little ground to some of these folks. So what they let me do, at Berkeley, they had a PhD program. If you could convince the academic senate you didn't fit in anybody's program, and it was pretty demanding to do that. If you could do that, they'd let you design your own doctoral program. So I got permission to do that. I got to pick my own faculty, put together my own curriculum. I formed a doctoral program in social systems design. I was the first and only graduate. I think there are graduates of that program now since then. The chancellor of Berkeley, who was one of my committee members, said, "This is a great honor, Harold. I mean, this is really an exciting time for you. It's also your worst day. Because when you leave here, there is no old boys network that's going to pick you up and get you into positions for your career. So your career is done." And it proved to be true. It surprises my students often when they graduate from programs to find the world isn't divided into disciplines. They don't have a chemistry day, they don't have a biology day, they have life. Wait. So anyway, that blew me off course, and then I decided to just continue to drift. This was kind of fun. I think I've taught in almost every department at a university except the humanities. Anyway, I want to talk a bit about encoding and decoding words, because I've heard design used in a lot of ways. And I want to tell you a story. Went to a base in the far north where people had been together forever. And my host invited me to lunch. I sat down. was eating, and suddenly somebody hollered out, 12! Everybody just cracked up, just laughed. Asked my host, what is this? Well, we've been together so long, we've heard each other's jokes so many times, that in order to save time, we've numbered them. Great, cool. 14, I yelled. Everybody just stared at me. Nothing. So I asked my host, what went wrong? Well, obviously, not everybody can tell a joke. You told that one wrong. I hear and I see written the term design used a lot. And I travel across a lot of domains of design. And it's a coded word and a coded narrative. It takes some time. You have to stop and figure out what is it that they're saying this is, that they're doing. So when I heard that the Army, U.S. Army, was bringing design in to its organization, I got excited because I'm a champion of design. I said, well, I better find out what that is. They use the term design. They use it in a very special way, which is fine. It's just that you have to know. Because when somebody is writing or talking to you about design, you have to figure out which rabbit hole they're pulling you down and what warren you're going to wind up in, which is fine. You just have to know which one it is. It's very important. I want to talk as much as I can with the time about how you discern these different meanings, what people mean when they're saying design. So one of the questions I get a lot when I go around and talk or work with people in business, government, universities, especially students, they'll ask, what is design? What is design? I hear it used in so many different ways. What is it? And they're kind of irritated, especially people who are newly introduced to design. So why don't you have a definition that we can work with? In order to answer them, I have to do a lot of tap dancing. I'm not going to go through this whole list. That's not the point. The point is, for instance, the reasons why we design, it's complex. This is an unending list that I have gone through talking to people. Why do you design? It's huge. I'm not going to go through it. It'll be on the exam, but I'm not going to go through it. Approaches to design. That's also complex. On the left is the list that Wiki made of all the established design fields. I sort of recognize or I've been a part of all of those. On the right are words labeled as design that have fallen off of my screen in the last 2 weeks as I was preparing for this. And there's hundreds of these, trust me. All sorts of specialized. I didn't get to the Israeli copy because that didn't come across my screen, but there's hundreds of these. What do they all mean? And how do I communicate with people in these different areas who are all using this? Another article that just came across my screen yesterday was Design Thinking is Dead. I get a lot of those. And this morning I got another article submitted saying, it's a buzzword. It's a buzzword, it's bad. I get a lot of that. So how do you communicate when there is so much dissonance around what it means? How can you be a successful designer? How can you become a designer? How can you practice design when there's so much dissonance? I love this archipelago metaphor. So I'm going to say islands are, in this case for me, as an accidental vagrant as I go around visiting islands. Their ecosystems, their cultures, their social systems, and they're also very immersive. It means when you're on that island, that's what you see. There's a great movie, I think it's a great movie, on World War II, Thin Red Line. about the battles in the Pacific. And one scene is perfect because this native islander walks right by a Marine and doesn't see him. And the Marine can't believe it. But that Marine is so out of context for that islander, he literally cannot see the Marine. And that's when we're immersive in our own fields. And it's true, I think, with military domains, it's true with business domains, it's true with all these. We literally cannot see things around us because we are totally immersed in this context. I'm going to talk about archipelago of design. Archipelagos. Archipelagos have a past. And I'm not going to talk about a past in this talk yet of design, but I'll say my understanding of the history of design goes way back to the beginning of time. Archaeologists design or discover and determine whether or not the fossils they're working on are human or not based on the designed objects they find. So design was, I would say, the first way that humans made meaning in the world and worked in the world. So it's got a very old history. Coming along down through pre-Socratics, we had this term Sophia, in philosophy, Sophia. Sophia at that time meant wise hand. That's how they used it. They were amazed at that time how they could make a ship appear in the harbor that had never existed before. We don't wonder those things so much now, but they would wonder that. How did we do that? Socrates and the others came along and divided Sophia into those who think and those who do. Those who do fell to the bottom of the hierarchy. We keep that today. Blue collar, white collar, we have camps. And I would say that's not useful anymore. That we should go back in history and reconnect with what design originally meant, a wise hand. Thinking about what you're doing is a good idea, not just doing. So anyway, I'm going to talk about design archipelagos at present, nascent, and a bit about the futures. Go through quickly the existing archipelago a bit. Art design, craft design. Art design primarily focuses on aesthetics. Craft design primarily focuses on materials. Transaction design primarily focuses on inventing and selling people things that they didn't ask for. Like Apple. I never told Apple I needed all that stuff, but I wanted it after I saw it, and they sold it to me. So that's a big part of design. Industrial design, product design, all that. Problematized design. In that domain, those designers depend on a problem statement to trigger action, to justify action. I've heard problem referenced here hundreds of times, but I always hear that. And there's a reason, and I'm not going to be critical about this approach here, but there's problems with problems. And there's a problem with starting with a problem. And when I'm talking to military people, I like to say, what that does is that puts you in retreat immediately. Oh, military guys aren't in retreat. Yeah. There's a problem. There's where you want to get away from it. You start getting away. Scientized design. Scientized design, and it's big in academia, where design is considered to be a science, and that you have to find what's true about design, and you act on what's true in the scientific tradition. A lot of the professions are recovering now from being scientized, or trying to. Medicine, management, a lot of the professions were scientized in the middle of the last century. They're trying to recover now. No, we're not exactly a science. It's good to be rational, it's good to work off of science, but we're not. So anyway, scientized design, almost every advanced degree in design, I come across, the students are required to do research. Well, research is one kind of inquiry. Trust me. One of the things I was emancipated around was one of my professors at Berkeley had written a book called The Design of Inquiring Systems. It's great if you've ever wanted to be emancipated from inquiring systems. C. West Churchman. And what Churchman did, he wrote a book based on 5 philosophers who all described ways of coming up with what was true. Well, all the papers I had to do, with the references that I had to do, following APA, all of those rules, turns out that's just one design to get to truth. And there are many others that we use, argumentation, all sorts of things. I thought, oh, cool. So you can actually think about designing an inquiring system that supports design. It's a great book. Recommend it. Engineering design. That's applied science. Putting together functional assemblies, focus on efficiency. I started off as an engineer early on. And then the final one that's emerging is artificial intelligence design, an artificial island placed over a natural terrain. AI design, trying to create artificial intelligence that will either augment people or displace people or meld with people. It's a very interesting field. It's a little scary, but again, it's decoding what they mean when they say intelligence and things like that people don't do, and how these algorithms come into existence, that sort of thing. So the singularity, I mean, if you want to make money, singularity is when machines and people are going to be one. They have a huge university in California. They have millions of dollars. I mean, they're really popular. People want to be bio-machines. So I want to talk a bit about the nascent islands of design, and this is where I find that I'm spending more of my time, happily, in systemic design. This doesn't mean this is the next step. This isn't the next logical step from those that are existing. And I have to say that all of those existing design archipelagos are not going away. They have school systems, they have training systems, they have professional organizations, they have a lot of structure in place, so engineering design is not going to go away. None of those are going to, and they shouldn't. They serve purposes, but they're all going to be around for a long time. Anyway, this is just for me. I'm interested in championing something called systemic design. And in my approach to systemic design, it's not systems thinking and design thinking. It's that design, systemic design, systems and design are so intertwined that you can't take them apart. When you design, you're creating relationships and connections and links. When you're looking at systems, you're looking at relationships, links, and connections. When you're making assessments, it's all the same thing. It's not a systems thinking approach, and it's not a design approach. It's all one. Systemics is the logic of design. Systemic design make the case that design is actually the third culture of inquiry. If you've heard about the 2 cultures of inquiry, science and the humanities, and they'll never get along. They'll never talk to one another. We make the case design is a third culture of inquiry. It has its own postulates. It has its own ways of working, its own tools, its own approaches. So in this case, design is not a method at all. There may be methods that you use, but we have our own axioms, we have everything. And design is rational and aesthetic in this case, but it's not driven by art or science. And then advanced design is something that I've become intrigued on, and I would say the two areas that I'm starting to get more interested in something called wide design and deep design. Wide design is kind of a meta perspective, and we're exploring things like space. And I was talking to, where's the space guy I was talking, the mapping guy, is he here? Ah, there you are. Well, how interesting it is to think about space. Somebody wrote a book a few years ago called The Design of Evolution. And in that book, Eric put together 3 schemas of space. And as an architect, I assumed I knew space. But he said space was physical, social, and religious or spiritual. Interesting. So I started working with that idea of space, and you can find all sorts of ways that people create different kinds of spaces. What are the boundaries? What are the containers? That increasing your perspective, multiple perspectives in this case. Hal Lindstone developed this model for multiple perspectives. It's been used quite successfully, looking at disasters, unfortunately, like the Shelton, others, Exxon Valdez. Almost everybody I run across takes what Lindstone would call the technical perspective. When you look at something, when you look at the system, you look at it from a technical, rational, scientific perspective. He said there's another one called organizational. So who's doing what and why are they doing it? Who needs to be doing? You don't get that information looking from a technical perspective. And he has another one called personal, which isn't your perspective. It's what do the individuals see in that situation. And they found out, for instance, it was more than just bad graphics. I can't remember who he is, the guy that writes about graphics and presentations. Hates PowerPoint. Anyway, they found out that it was through a personal perspective, they found out what the problem was, why those O-rings went bad. It was political, and people's fear of power and retribution in the organization. It wasn't technical, it wasn't organizational. So other people have taken that now and they've expanded it so that you have religious perspectives, you have political perspectives, you can imagine all sorts of ways of looking at these things. It's sort of like Plato's shadow on the wall. What are you really seeing? So you see all these shadows, but the habit is that we usually take the technical perspective almost immediately. It's default. Deep design allows us to look at what is the philosophy of design, what's the meta-narrative about design. And it may sound abstract, but it's really not, because we all operate off of philosophies, whether or not we're aware of it. It may be default, it may be borrowed, but we all have philosophies. Philosophy is another one of those words that's coded. When people talk about philosophy, and they talk about philosophy in universities or something, 99% of the time it's the philosophy of science. Occasionally, they'll admit to the philosophy of technology. But nowadays, journals, everything, it's almost always philosophy of science. So we're saying we need a philosophy of design, because can you imagine? Designers create reality. I ask students sitting in an audience like this, look around and how much is natural and how much is artificial in this environment. I mean, design for some reason is invisible to people in society. I don't understand, because you're in it all the time. Your memories, who you are, is often based on what's been designed. Products, places, they're all designed. So why not have a philosophy of design? Because we're creating the world. And design, I would say, co-creates reality and it guides evolution. So now we're in a new age, the geologists tell us, where there are no natural systems on the earth anymore. We can't study natural systems. Every system has been infected by human activity. It's called the Anthropocene. So if we're doing that, it seems that we ought to be aware of what we're doing and how we should be doing it better, and how do we become responsible for it. So why is design so invisible? Why is it so new? I mean, pilots get into jet aircraft that's been designed. Why is design invisible? Or the Navy gets into brand new ships that get frozen into Montreal. That's a scam. That is a I want to talk a bit about the archipelagos that design islanders visit, or that are the origins of visitors to design islands. I just put together a brief schema of different human activity systems that are coherent, that we're fairly aware of. There's others, of course, but all of these archipelagos are linked to one another. They talk, exchange, they're interrelated, at least the healthy ones. When you go to visit these islands, whether you're coming from a design island or the other way, the thing that you want to watch for, that you need to know about, is you have to look for how do they maintain viability in their ecosystems, how do they manage their cultural boundaries, and how do they steer their systems, the cybernetic side. Just as an example, I will venture into the military archipelago. And if I get this really wrong, tell me. But this is where the defenders and the warriors reside on all these different islands. So when you come to one of the islands, you're pretty sure you're going to wind up facing the Haka, because they have really strict boundary control. They want to maintain the integrity of their systems, their traditions. They get pretty fierce about it, and to get past that or to gain entry takes a lot of dancing around, and you don't have to go native necessarily to get past them. You just have to show your bona fides. You have to show that you're not bringing anything that's going to destroy their systems or anything. And this is a good thing, actually, to protect boundaries. Systems need to do that. I mean, Post-it notes have become the kudzu of design islands now. They cover everything. They've smothered everything. You should be careful what you bring in. I just brought them in because I thought it was decoration. It went rogue. Connected islands are open islands, and you need to do that as well. There are two islands near Alaska, one north of Alaska and one south, where the last of the mastodons survived several thousand years after the mainland mastodons had died out. So one population died out because they lacked diversity. The other population died out because they lacked water. You need to be an open system to survive. So it's good to try to be a closed system and protect your borders and pretend like there's no environment, there's no influence coming in. But you really need to be open to get resources. I don't know if you all need surfer dudes on your island, but this is 3 ways that I see you can choose to praxis or design praxis is you can become independent and design with autonomy. You can become design dependent. I go to in a lot of organizations. Usually I'm called in right after a large consulting firm had come in and done some design work and they just hate it. But they're dependent on the consultants to come in and do their design work. Or you can choose a design alliance where you ally yourself with people who are good at designing but you're good at knowing what you're doing and what you need to do and what you want to do. Anyway, all those three are appropriate and people use them all the time. Takeaways, and these are just a quick sort of outline, is you need to establish contextual awareness because communication is important, especially if you're talking to people from other islands and you want to build alliances and you want to maintain some kind of viability in your own system. You have to be able to communicate and let people know what you're up to. When you say planning or design, do you really mean planning? Do you mean innovation? I mean, business uses those terms interchangeably all the time. I have no clue what they're talking about. And people say, we need to be more innovative. What does that mean? Innovation means actually you bring something new into somebody's life. So like democracy is an old idea. But if you bring it into a country that's never had it, that's innovation. Innovation is not creativity. Innovation is bringing something new into a system. Crack cocaine was the most successful innovation in America. It was in every city, every neighborhood, every village, every place. It was incredibly successful as an innovation. Is innovation just by itself good? No. It just describes a process. Anyway, stances and approaches are context dependent. You need to develop design cultures, social crucibles. Design is a pretty hot activity. When I was at the Lawrence Berkeley lab, the physicists were experimenting with temperatures that exceeded the temperature on the surface of the sun. So how do you hold that? How do you hold that? They did it with magnetic force. So as you all have witnessed, design is pretty dangerous. People are a little crazy. You need something to hold and protect that activity. You need to create that along with your capacity to be a designer. In summary, so I coded my summary for you, just 17. But don't forget, situational and contextual awareness is a good thing.
Thank you very much, sir. There's some time left for a couple of questions. Please.
No rushing the speaker.
So thank you very much. Very interesting brief. But after having listened to it, I would be keen to know what your opinion is on the notion that if design is everything, maybe it's nothing.
No, design is all those different things. So you have to know what it is that you're up to. So, and I get this a lot. Usually it's, if design is important, then you're saying it's everything. So it's nothing? No. Design is how you choose to practice it. You just need to know what you're practicing and what you're up to. So then you can get good at what you're trying to do. So I make the case, try to make the case, you need to be good at being a systemic designer. Thinking from a whole systems perspective. That's the skill level. So going to a weekend workshop and first aid is not going to qualify you to become a medical doctor. So in systemic design, a workshop isn't going to make you a designer. It's a commitment to really build skills. And there are gradations of skills. You don't start off as a master designer. You start off as a beginner, a starter. And then you work through. Did that answer?
Yes, it did. It was deliberately a provocative question to see what you would say and trying to play devil's advocate. So
You're
you
so-
answered it very well, thank you.
You're so Australian.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That was excellent.
Thank you.
If I may, I'll take 10 seconds. And you mentioned Churchman.
Yeah.
And he goes like this. The moral principle is this. Whoever attempts to tame a part of a wicked problem, but not the whole, is morally wrong. To date, operations research and management science have been largely indifferent to morality of the profession. Perhaps because the profession has not yet taken itself seriously. That the profession has a moral problem, nonetheless, there can be no doubt. It might make us look more mature if we began to discuss it.
Yeah.
Now, my short question, it's closed, but it's very open. How does sustainment play? Does sustainment play a key issue within design and systems thinking?
Yeah. Yeah, to design a sustainable system. I mean, even for yourselves, you can't freeze a system and call it sustainable because human systems are alive and changing and creative. Your new generations are coming up. They want new, different things. That's sustainable. If you try to stop it and control it, like some societies have, you're doomed to failure because you're going to kill your system. And the thing about wicked problems, by the way, I wanted to say quickly, is that Riddle never meant for people to, I hear wicked problem all the time, and it's kind of a code word too. He never intended people to treat those as problems. They're not. You can't tame them, you can't divide them down. They're not problems. You have to find another way to deal with those situations that he described in the conditions for why you think it's a wicked problem. So he took politics. He created a method of argumentation for resolving those. I took design. So we all had to find ways to get out of the paralysis of looking at something and say, oh crap, that's the situations I'm in. What do you do? Because his wicked problem descriptions aren't steps. They're just a description. They don't tell you what to do. And by the way, description and explanation do not prescribe action. So action cannot come out of even the best science. You need a bridge, and design is the bridge.
Thank you. I've been reflecting on the role of emergence that plays in design. So far, I've been hearing a lot around, and myself as well, and in my practice around design as something that you said you can't control, and it's true. But at the same time, you kind of want to control what's happening. And the anecdote that comes to mind that really reflected for me around emergence is a few years back. I was in Egypt during the Arab Spring or the Winter of Discontent, and someone was walking me around Tahrir Square, and when there was a lot of people, and he was describing how it was built on self-organized systems. So we walk around, he says, like, here there's a theater of the oppressed, and here if people are too noisy, we bring them to a prison, but there's no leader. People were bringing public toilets and so forth, and it got me thinking around, so this is something that's happening, that is emerging. It's really self-organized. There's no overarching design. It's actually channeled through different self-organized. And I thought, what's the contribution of design, of thinking about what is emerging as opposed to what you want to create and shaping?
That's an excellent point. It depends on the level of design that you're going into as an architect. I had to make sure that every damn detail was done to within millimeters. So when they're pouring cement and things, you had to know that it was going to be right. You had to know the details. You don't have to know that in social design, social systems design, so that you can work on rules of relationship, protocols. So, I mean, that's what our whole drone thing is all about, is you create a set of rules of relationship between these flying machines, and they behave in a very complex way, but you're not choreographing all of that. All you've done is you've designed the protocols that go into place. Companies have taken this idea, so they go from these huge stacks. I'm sure you're not used to huge stacks of paper, but they go from huge, big stacks of paper guiding how employees should dress, work, behave, and they focused on rules of relationship. And if everybody followed these protocols, they would get the kind of behavior they wanted. And this stack went way, 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 way down. And that's all you have to control for, is that people operate according to these rules of relationship. And our whole swarming piece is a part of that idea. And emergence, I mean the complex behavior of flocks in schools, the emergence, you can design for emergence, but you don't design in detail for it. You design at different levels. You can design for synergies, which means that you're not designing in detail again. Or emergence, water emerges when you bring two different atoms together. So you get wetness. That's an emergent quality that you don't see in either one of the atoms by themselves. But if you put them in a certain relationship in certain proportion, you get wetness. So if you know what you want is cohesion or community or something like that, then you design for that kind of emergent quality. And you're not designing details, like you and you sit together, you and you do this. You're not designing for synergies in that way. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir, for your excellent and inspiring lecture. All your lecture is based on the preposition that reality is relation. And design can be considered as a praxeology or a theory of actions applied to different fields of the world. My question is, according to your lecture, that design can be considered too as a teleology. That is to say, my question is, how is the path from the is world to the art world, and what ethical implications can be derived?
Yeah. So for me, in this new archipelago that I'm working on, is design is a social system activity. It's not an individual's activity. And it's not the activity of an individual or group of individuals called designers. It's a social system made up of a diversity of people doing different things in different roles. And we call the whole collection, I mean, you have design teams that you can develop, then you have design cohorts. And in the design cohorts, you have to have decision makers, you have to have clients. And that's a poor word in design, but we've not been able to ever find something better. But the client, you do the design for that client. So that client is telling you what's important to them. They're giving you the values they want to see expressed, and you have the capacity to make something appear in the world that's going to serve their needs. And that's a huge difference, and it's ethical. I mean, I guess I was in Chile one time, a graduate student told me, I was asking him about all the changes in government and that. And he said, you know, they forget. People like to change, they don't like to be changed. And design, in my perspective, needs to be a relationship of service. That's where you get the values, because, I mean, you can design for yourself, that's a tough client. But if you're designing for the public, the government, future generations, that's tough. How do you contract with them? But you can't just take action on your own, or like you describe something in very compelling ways, and then a scientist like the global warming scientists say, and therefore we have to, and people say, no, no. Now you've just stepped out of the science role into a political role. And that's true. Description and explanation do not prescribe action. You need clients, you need people you're serving, you need value systems that are in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. A lot of food for thought. I have found it very inspirational, and I can take a lot of things personally. Ladies and gentlemen, please a big applause for Dr. Nelson.